A warm greeting. Today is Tuesday, September 17, 2024. This is meteorologist Ruben Garcia. In this video, I will briefly talk about the remnants of Tropical Storm Gordon, which could reorganize in the coming days as it moves through open waters of the Atlantic. But more importantly, we will be discussing the possible development of a tropical cyclone in the western Caribbean Sea for next week. It's important for residents from Florida to Texas, Central America, the Yucatán Peninsula, Cuba, and Jamaica to pay attention to tropical outlooks over the next few days, as it is very likely that the National Hurricane Center will highlight this area as a potential zone for tropical cyclone development next week. At the end of the video, we will also talk about some tropical waves emerging from Africa toward the end of September that could encounter favorable conditions for development. Let's start by discussing the remnants of what was Tropical Depression Gordon until yesterday. It's no longer a tropical cyclone, but the National Hurricane Center gives it up to a 40% chance of reorganizing as it moves north-northeast. There is a possibility that we might again see the development of a tropical depression or tropical storm, and if this happens, it will retain the name Gordon. The good news is that it does not pose any threat to land areas. However, the outlook is different for the western Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico, where tropical development is likely within 7 to 9 days. This is mainly because a favorable phase of the Madden-Julian Oscillation (MJO) will arrive in the Caribbean and Atlantic starting next week, creating favorable conditions for development in the Caribbean Sea, Gulf of Mexico, and the tropical Atlantic. In fact, today, NOAA's Climate Prediction Center has marked the western Caribbean region with a high probability of tropical cyclone formation between September 25th and October 1st. The tropical Atlantic region is also marked with a medium chance of tropical cyclone development. This clearly corresponds to the arrival of this favorable phase of the MJO, which will remain over the Atlantic and Africa at least through the first week of October, and it is very likely that cyclonic activity will continue in the Atlantic Ocean. Let's now take a look at some model runs, especially to talk about the Central American Gyre, which is expected to develop over the weekend over Central America. Let's start with the GFS model projection. You can see that during the hours of Saturday and Sunday, a large circulation establishes itself over Central America, which we know as the Central American Gyre, and this is where a low-pressure system could develop in the western Caribbean. Note that this model projects the development of a tropical depression near the Yucatán Peninsula and Cuba by Monday afternoon, eventually moving north toward or over the southeastern United States. For example, in 8 to 9 days, the GFS model develops a tropical storm or hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. However, this is a long-term forecast, and we still do not know the future trajectory if a tropical cyclone develops. The important thing is that Gulf Coast states, including the Yucatán Peninsula, Jamaica, Cuba, and the Bahamas, should closely monitor the evolution of this Central American Gyre. On the other hand, we also have the European model, which also develops a Central American Gyre over the weekend, showing the development of a low-pressure system east of Belize and the Yucatán Peninsula by next Tuesday morning. In this case, the European model keeps the circulation quite broad, and, at least in its latest run, does not consolidate this center of circulation. This means that tropical cyclone development is not guaranteed for two main reasons. First, this is a long-term forecast, and significant changes could happen in the coming days. And second, tropical development related to the Central American Gyre is notoriously difficult to predict, as multiple low-pressure zones typically develop in the western Caribbean and eastern Pacific, often competing for cyclone formation. However, in recent days, the chances of development in the western Caribbean have been increasing, as the majority of models foresee at least a tropical depression or tropical storm developing. For example, the German model projection shows a very broad circulation over Central America, and the UK model sees the development of a tropical depression just east of Belize and the Yucatán Peninsula early next week. It also shows a low-pressure system developing south of Chiapas and southwest of Guatemala. There's also a possibility that we could see the development of two tropical cyclones, one in the Caribbean and one in the eastern Pacific. This is why all of Central America should be closely monitoring this Central American Gyre. Regardless of whether we see cyclonic development, heavy rain is expected, which could cause flooding in Panama, Costa Rica, southern Nicaragua, and parts of the western Caribbean. Notice that the ensemble members of the American GFS model show that many of them develop a tropical storm or hurricane by the middle and end of next week, but we can clearly see that there are many scenarios, ranging from the development of a tropical depression with a trajectory over Cuba, the Bahamas, or Florida, while other members show a trajectory towards the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. This is why everyone from the Bahamas, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Texas, and the Mexican states bordering the Gulf of Mexico should closely monitor the evolution of this Central American Gyre. Also, notice that the ensemble members of the European model generally also agree on the development of at least a tropical depression or tropical storm, but we have different scenarios, and at the moment it is impossible to determine a trajectory with certainty. At the very least, residents of Central America, the Yucatán Peninsula, Cuba, and Jamaica should monitor the possible rain event that will begin over the weekend. The GFS model also shows accumulated rainfall of 200 to 250 millimeters for parts of Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama, with 75 to 100 millimeters for the Yucatán Peninsula, Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Honduras. Depending on where the tropical cyclone could develop, this model projects 200 to 250 millimeters of accumulated rainfall near Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, and over Cuba. At the very least, we know there is a high risk of flooding over the next 7 to 9 days in the Western Caribbean and over Central America. NOAA's imagery also shows that we will be monitoring the tropical Atlantic, as some long-term models project possible development related to several tropical waves emerging from Africa during the last week of September and the first week of October. The European model ensemble also supports this idea, with 3 tropical waves having some chances of cyclonic development by the end of September. However, over the next few days, we will focus on the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico region. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Go to the bottom of the video, click on the red subscribe button, and then click on the bell to receive notifications when I post new videos. Well, that's it for today. I'll see you tomorrow with an updated forecast. I hope you all have a great night. Goodbye.